This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, we share why Jason Aldean's cancel culture fight is one for the ages. We chat with a filmmaker who warned us about the woke revolution all the way back in 2015, and we didn't listen. And we let Piers Morgan, of all people, have the final word on the Barbie movie.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
Before we start, I'd love it if you'd subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast so you won't miss a single show, or just tell a friend all about us. Jason Aldean is all of us. Now, listen, we all don't tour the country singing songs like Big Green Tractor to screaming fans, but we are all worried about speaking our minds, and we wonder, what if we say the wrong thing at the wrong time? What could happen? Now, Aldean's springtime song, Try That in a Small Town, just exploded across the culture. An atom bomb, if you will, just in time for Oppenheimer. It's a stinging rebuke to those 3+ years of mostly peaceful protests, spitting on cops, often literally, and letting the woke mob destroy businesses and buildings across the country. Now, for what it's worth, people of all races took part in those protests, and some of them are still going on today. And the media instantly nailed Aldean's song as racist. Someone noted he shot the video on ground where a lynching once took place, as if he took that into consideration. I mean, probably the furthest thing from his mind. Who knows where an abhorrent act has been committed decades ago? But some said he's pro-lynching. And of course, the media amplified his harshest critics. Our press is corrupt, in case you weren't paying attention. Now, Aldean could have pulled a Stephen King, a Halle Berry, or even a Scarlett Johansson. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'll be an ally for BLM and various causes moving forward. Please don't cancel me. Instead, he flipped his critics the bird. Now, not literally, but close enough.
It's been a long week, and I've seen a lot of stuff. Suggesting I'm this, suggesting I'm that. Here's the thing. Here's one thing I feel like everybody's entitled to their opinion. You can think something all you want to, it doesn't mean it's true, right? So what I am is a proud American. I'm proud to be from here. I love our country. I want to see it restored to what it once was before all this bullshit started happening to us. I love my country, I love my family, and I will do anything to protect that. I can tell you that right now.
His ability to stand tall, not apologize, and stick to his guns, it does matter. Now, let's not beat around the bush. Aldean's song is one stiff drink. It's combative at times. It suggests those small town types won't take kindly to their towns being destroyed. Could get ugly, could get violent. It's a bare-knuckle message, and you can certainly interpret it in different ways. It's also the voice of a lot of Americans who hated watching this country burn week after week, month after month, while the media and the government did nothing, if not sometimes cheer it on. Now, songs are often sung from different points of view. That's the creative license that every singer has. It could be a hip-hop track that talks about a young black man fighting back against the violence in his community, maybe even going toe-to-toe with the local gangs. It doesn't mean it condones that violence. You can interpret it that way, but it's a story. And singers and songwriters can tell those stories. They've been doing it for years. And there's many, many examples of songs that are outright praising violence, framing it in a positive way, far more than Aldean's track, Try That in a Small Town. But of course, the media and the left, and we're repeating ourselves, they don't want the true nature of the BLM-inspired riots shared or explored or dismissed or attacked. And they sure don't want conservatives to have pop culture on their side, ever. If you doubt me, Just see all the headlines surrounding Sound of Freedom. That's Exhibit A. That's why the attacks on Aldean have been so ferocious, and that's why him sticking to his guns, not literally again, means so much both to him and us. In 2015, my next guest made a movie that absolutely nailed the future. I wish he didn't, but he did. It was called Can We Take a Joke? And it looked at the new rules that were clamping down on comedians at the time.
If you think you have the right not to be offended, either change your parameters of what offends you, or just realize you're wrong.
I've always refused to apologize for a joke.
There's a lot of people out there whose job it is to be offended for other people.
It's almost like people have gotten soft.
It's the duty of a comedian to find out where the line is drawn and deliberately cross over. Donald always says money can't buy happiness, but it can buy the best Eastern European whores New York City has to offer.
If you're easily offended, please don't come to a comedy show.
When they start going for the comedians, everyone else needs to sweat.
Man, I miss Gilbert Gottfried so much. But more importantly, director Ted Balaker captured the dawn of the woke era. They didn't call it woke at the time, but that's exactly what was happening. He did it all too well. That's why I wanted to have him back on the show to see how far we've fallen as a society since that movie came out, and also find out what he's got up his sleeve next. Turns out he's got a few projects. He's tracking the woke revolution still. He's got an upcoming film that will be really important to the culture, I think. He also has a Substack newsletter. It's called Shiny Herd, where he explores these issues in really good detail. You're going to hear Ted's memories from his joke documentary, as well as whether he thinks the woke revolution is gasping for air, it's about to collapse, or maybe we've got a few more years of this nonsense. He knows his territory better than almost anyone. That's why you should pay attention. Here's my interview with filmmaker, journalist, and Kreskin-like sage, Ted Balaker. Ted, thanks for joining the show. Before we officially begin, I want to go back to the past and look at a really good film you made from 2015 called Can We Take a Joke? And I guess in a way it seems a bit quaint, just given how much the culture has changed for the worse in the comedy landscape. But how would you describe things from that point to where we are today as far as Chappelle and Rogan and all these different issues regarding comedy, free speech, and censorship?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me, Christian. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah, it's funny. Way back then, it seems like a completely different world. I remember my wife, Courtney, and she's my producing partner and producer on that doc. We had the hardest time convincing distributors that cancel culture, although it wasn't even called cancel culture back then, it was called outrage culture. We had a hard time convincing them that it was a big deal. They kept telling us, oh, come on, guys, this is just, yes, it's crazy and it's stupid, but all this madness is going to confine itself to college campuses. It's never going to spill into the culture at large. And, of course, looking back on it now, boy, were they wrong. And boy, were we right. That was a big theme of the film, that it's not going to stop at college campuses. So, ultimately we found a great distributor in Samuel Goldwyn Films, and the film has gone on to do very well. Frankly, in part because things have gone so badly the rest of the world. My wife and I joke that when the culture is going down the tubes, it's good for our business. But I'd much rather have we could make movies about anything. I'd much rather have the culture in the right spot. So short answer is things have gotten much, much worse. I think there are signs of some green shoots, signs of a correction in the other direction. I write quite a bit about cancel culture, especially the hidden parts of it. I think a lot of times in the discussions about cancel culture, most in the mainstream media, surprise, get things extremely wrong about what's going on. I think So I would say things have gotten worse. There are some signs that things are getting better, but I think there's also a very good chance that things get much worse before they get better.
That's my overall sense as well. And by the way, a couple of things. One is I love when the media puts cancel culture in scare quotes, as if it doesn't quite exist. It's just this word, this phrase that some of the kids are using. But also, have you been able to stay in touch with some of the comedians, either from that film or just comedians in general? I'm kind of curious what they're talking about of late.
Yeah. Well, one of the stars of the film, Gilbert Gottfried, of course, has passed away. And so that was a big blow. We got to know him pretty well. He's just a prince of a guy. He's very different in person than he is on stage, but just the warmest, sweetest guy. Frankly, one of the best. I've conducted hundreds of interviews, maybe thousands over the years. He's one of the very best. And he, to his great credit, never buckled. We see, some comedians who started as free speech advocates, because it's almost like you don't even have to be that. If you're a comedian, that's kind of what you kind of are already, or should be. So we did, we were in contact with him, and he participated in some really great events with the film, including one at the Comedy Cellar in New York City, and at the now defunct museum in Washington, D.C. Of course, it was a Washington, D.C. museum devoted to the First Amendment, so that's the museum we have to get rid of. And that was a fantastic event filled with 400 people, journalists, think tankers, foundation people, frankly, people who really needed to hear the message of free speech. And certainly Careth Foster in the movie. I should mention, Careth Foster is one of the best outcomes of Can We Take a Joke? She is a comedian turned diversity trainer, but before you cringe, she's not that type of diversity trainer. Imagine a diversity trainer who was also a comedian, or one who respected the First Amendment and just free speech in general. Imagine one who was funny and didn't make everybody tense, but made them loose and comfortable to talk about things. Imagine somebody who didn't divide people based on immutable characteristics, but united them based on their common humanity, on the very kind of Martin Luther Kingian idea that we have more in common than we have in terms of differences. That's the kind of diversity trainer Careth Foster is. And so I think a lot of people would say, if she's going to run it, then great. Then it's just about let's respect people and their points of view, and have a much different approach to this than what we're seeing. So the film itself was her first national exposure of her, what I call a dissident approach to DEI training. And it resulted in lots of great publicity for her. She was invited to go to Stanford to speak, lots of prestigious universities, lots of well-known corporations in North America and elsewhere. And then just recently, I want to say about a month ago, there she was in a big write-up in the New York Times.
Wow.
And so, as you well know, the New York Times is kind of sacred scripture for about half the country. And so she has officially a human being now in their eyes, because she was not only featured prominently with many photographs, and I couldn't believe it, but featured sympathetically. So this is just she credits the film with really launching her career to new heights. And I think the New York Times coverage of her is going to bring her career to even higher heights. So on balance, things are going great for her, but there are cases, and I've written about some of them in my Substack, where she, a Black woman, has been put on a blacklist, muzzled by white progressives on campus. And that's part of the very twisted story of DEI on campus these days.
Yeah. I have two questions for you. I want to start with one. Maybe it's not fair of me to ask this because you are a journalist and a filmmaker, but not a comedian. But what do you make of stars like Stephen Colbert and Marc Maron and some others as well, who seem to either not care about cancel culture or certainly not be on the front lines of the free speech wars? It just seems like, I don't care if I disagree with Stephen Colbert on politics, doesn't matter to me at all. But he and I should be, arm in arm when it comes to defending free speech. And he's not alone. And he's, you think he has enough fame and power where he could use that clout to fight back, but he's not. Do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, again, I don't know if it's necessarily fair, but I'm curious what you think their perspective is on this.
Yeah, well, sometimes I like to, one of my heroes is Thomas Sowell, and he likes to flip questions around a lot. And so he would probably say, like, why are those who are supporting free speech? Mm-hmm. I think that, on the first point, I'm not here to psychoanalyze people, so I can't get into their heads, but I do know how incentives work. And I think there are just, sadly, a lot of incentives to play the game that they're playing. These guys wouldn't have the positions they have if they were, I think, full-throated free speech proponents. So it's good for business. And sadly, that's even true in the world of stand-up comedy and in the world of late night. You look at the comedians, the big names who have stood up. Dave Chappelle, for instance, is that someone that most comedians want to emulate? I mean, he can. I think a lot of people, at the outset, I said a lot of people in the media misunderstand what's going on with cancel culture, and Chappelle is one of the great examples of this. They love to say, oh, okay, Balaker, you think cancel culture is so bad? Well, Chappelle's still making loads of money, and lots of people are showing up. He's getting, Emmy nominations. How clearly cancel culture is a figment of your imagination. And I just can't believe how wrong they are, because the message, the real activity with cancel culture isn't so much with whatever celebrities in the crosshairs at the moment. It's the unseen, if you will, the ripple effect that goes down. So on the one hand, you could say, well, Chappelle is still rich and famous. But on the other hand, you could say, well, he's been disavowed by so many people. He had a big dust up with his alma mater, where they didn't even want to accept money from him. He's toxic in a lot of circles. He had a guy, try to stab him on stage. He is on the, quote unquote, wrong side of history, according to all the people who mangle and overuse that phrase. So he's lost a lot of friends. He's lost a lot of opportunities, I'm sure. So on top of that, he's still very wealthy because he's Dave Chappelle, and he earned his wealth before he started speaking out. But all the 18-year-old Dave Chappelles out there are taking note. They're not, they're not eager to stick their necks out the way they are. I have, friends, a lot of friends who are comedians, and some who are, in their early 20s who are comedians. They flat out tell me, I'm going to avoid X, Y, and Z topics because, I care more about being famous and paying the rent than I do, about being the modern day Lenny Bruce.
Yeah. And also his documentary has yet to find a distributor because of what was going on. And he came this close to getting significantly canceled. I think if Netflix had backed down and appeased the mob and taken that show, The Closer, off their lineup, I think we could be in a different world right now as far as comedy. And I think that Chappelle would legitimately be canceled in a way that you could not even come close to defending. So and like you said, it's not just him. If they could nearly take down the GOAT, the best, then what about everyone else who's trying to be a fraction of how good he is? And by the way, you're also a journalist, and this one I can ask you with more clarity. There are journalists out there who seem against free speech. They have no problem with the government colluding with the big tech platforms. There was a significant free speech victory in the last few days, and the media accounts seem like they're literally angry about what's going on. Whoa. What happened to journalists? I mean, it's one thing that comedians maybe are getting comfy and cozy with their gigs and they don't have to speak out. But gosh, the day when journalists aren't supporting free speech, I never thought we'd see it, and here we are.
Yeah, it's well, they're part of the monoculture. They share the same brain with filmmakers, film distributors. With it's the same brain that most college administrators and frankly most college professors have. And it's just the sad truth of the world that oftentimes journalists don't stand up for the First Amendment, don't stand up for free expression. I think a lot of the times it's because they, every, polls show overwhelmingly that they are progressive, and most of the canceling and so forth that's happening these days, you can find counterexamples here and there, but most of it is coming, from progressives. So if you're, unfortunately, the people who are stand on principle and free speech are fewer than the people who are opportunists and support it when when things are going well, and then kind of shy away from it when things aren't going so well. Mm-hmm. So basically, if you're not being muzzled, then what's the problem? If all these quote unquote evil people you disagree with are getting muzzled, then they're just spreading misinformation, and so it's not a big deal. We need these people who know better to tell us what the real information is, even if it changes from year to year.
Yeah. No. One of the things you've done in recent months is you joined the Substack Revolution. Your newsletter is called Shiny Herd, the hidden side of groupthink. Tell us a little bit about that, the positive side of joining Substack, and also, is this a different way to get your message out? Has it been helpful in that regard?
Yeah, sure thing, Christian. Well, like all of us, we were kind of, my wife and I and other colleagues in film and media. I started my career in media at ABC News in New York, and still have lots of ties to media. So I write about that, even though I'm mainly in entertainment these days. So in 2020, the world went mad, and industries, if you count media and entertainment as separate industries, both of them have long been narrow-minded. But after 2020, it just became downright suffocating. And my wife and I have lots of stories to tell, lots more that we can't tell, about what goes on in plain view, and mostly what goes on behind the scenes. That's where most of the action takes place. It's like the proverbial iceberg, where it's, you only see the tip of the iceberg, mm-hmm. but most of the damage is done below the waterline. So this was a way I was hemming and hawing for a number of years right after 2020 about what to do with it, because I suddenly found myself in dealing with cancel culture in a very personal way, and in way, if I had to, when I was trying to pitch, can we take a joke to distributors, in 2015, I wish I would have known what was coming. So on the one hand, we wanted to. My wife and I are pretty unusual, I think, in the entertainment industry, in that our film production company is devoted to making important ideas entertaining. We made Little Pink House with Catherine Keener, which addresses property rights. We made, Can We Take a Joke, which you've mentioned, which addresses free speech. We're doing another one, The Coddling of the American Mind, which also addresses free speech and anti-fragility. So we do movies, we produce movies that Hollywood usually doesn't want to produce because it doesn't fit with their worldview. And we've had quite good success at getting these rather subversive films in front of mainstream audiences. One of our mottos is don't just preach to the converted. So we're very keen to bring these ideas to people who haven't considered them. So on the one hand, we need to be able to keep doing that. So we have to. So we're not the type of people to not fight the good fight. We've literally devoted our lives to that, I would say. But you can, in any kind of battle, and sometimes I don't like the war analogies too much, but we're speaking metaphorically.
Sure.
You still have to pick your battles. If you're if your army is much smaller than the other ones, you can still be fighting valiantly, but you have to fight smartly too. So you have to pick your battles. And we didn't want to just kind of talk about these things if there was going to be no effect. We wanted people to know what's going on, but we didn't want to needlessly put ourselves in harm's way. Now we do that anyway with our what else, all the other things that we do. So Substack was kind of a way to finally do this. So after a couple of years of hemming and hawing about what to do, I just started Shiny Herd in order to explore the hidden side of groupthink in entertainment and media, because I think it's just far worse than people realize. I think Courtney and I have a pretty unique vantage point where we're in this world, but not of the world. And so it's just, you know, I wish I had other things to report, but it's frankly much worse than your audience probably thinks it is.
Gotcha.
This was one way of getting the word out in a productive way.
Sure. Just before the mics went hot, you talked a little bit about the coddling of the American mind. You can't share an exact release date quite yet, but you can certainly delve into the subject. This is about higher education. These are some of the forces at work here. Give us a teaser. Now, the book came out, I think, in 2018, so obviously you have to push things forward a little bit, but give us a sneak peek at the movie and what you think will come away with after watching it.
Yeah, well, the book was a big hit. Like you said, came out in 2018. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 9 weeks. Was covered by most every major media outlet. So it was a big deal. Written by Greg Lukianoff at Fire and Jonathan Haidt at NYU, and they've just done great work in the field of the mental health crisis among Gen Z. So right around 2012 or so, the rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide for young people just started to shoot up, and nobody knew why. So it was a very troubling time. And, you know, my wife and I have an 8-year-old who, and you know, the teen years feel like about 10 minutes away. So it was personal for us too. So it was very unsettling in 2012 to see this happening to young people, and nobody knew why. Why was this happening? It was unparalleled. And then along comes our friend Greg Lukianoff, who, in his own bout with severe depression and his own bout with suicide, stumbles upon some of the reasons, and more importantly, perhaps some of the solutions to help Gen Z. These are young people, even younger than millennials, who are struggling mightily with anxiety, depression, and suicide. So the movie takes the ideas and themes of the book and tells them through the stories of a global group of extremely compelling 20-somethings who have fallen into darkness with anxiety, depression, and brushes with suicide, but have come out the other end to find happiness, to claw their way back to happiness and fulfillment. And so it's kind of a story about happiness, how to lose it and how to gain it back again.
Wow.
And there's a lot to it. Some of the important themes are, frankly, free expression and the surprising role that a culture of free speech plays in our own psychological well-being, as well as related concepts such as anti-fragility, this idea that we are not weak, we are strong. And not only that, we need a certain amount of stressors, a certain amount of challenges in life in order to grow even stronger. That's just how human beings are.
Yeah.
And so that's what the movie explores. And you know, stay tuned for that. We're just earlier today, we had a conversation with our distributor talking about you know, basically how to start our rollout. It will begin later this year. We don't know what part of the rollout will be first. We're still working that out right now.
Excellent. Well, I know my sons are 12 and 14, and I'm going to have to watch that with them, because I think it's going to really hit hard. Yeah. So, but Ted, thank you so much for joining the Hollywood Podcast. Of course, check out his great Substack newsletter. It's called Shiny Herd, and then you can rewatch some of his films, Can We Take a Joke, and also Little Pink House, which is excellent. It's a message movie where the message is so beautifully interwoven in the story. you don't realize you're being pushed to think in a very gentle but firm way. That's the best kind of movie, best kind of drama for sure. And of course, the movie is the Coddling of the American Mind, coming very soon this fall. Don't know quite sure yet, but we'll have all the details on the show, no doubt about it. All the best, Ted, and keep fighting the good fight. And one day I want to hear those stories that you can't tell quite yet, but I'm sure you will someday.
Of course. Will do, Christian. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
Before we go, I want to share a quick and hopefully final segment on the Barbie movie. Yep, it's a huge hit, and there's lots of conversation around it. And when I shared my negative review of the film on Twitter, I got, I think, 4 days of extreme backlash. Nasty comments, how dare you? A lot of this was before the movie was even out, because I got a sneak peek of it before the audiences do, and that was, of course, makes no sense. How could you yell at me about a movie if you haven't seen it? I mean, unreal. But, listen, when you get that kind of feedback, you don't screen it out entirely. Maybe they have a point. Maybe I missed something about the movie. It made me have some self-reflection. I think that's good for a critic. And then I read Piers Morgan's review of the film, and I felt a little bit better. That Brit nailed it. Here's a sneak peek. I don't know any woman other than perhaps U.S. female soccer superstar Megan Rapinoe who wants a world where women dominate absolutely everything and men are reduced to dim-witted doormats barely capable of changing a light bulb. The column is full of those observations. Really good stuff, but to me, this is the rhetorical kill shot. If I made a movie mocking women as useless dunderheads, constantly attacking the matriarchy and depicting all things feminist as toxic bull, I wouldn't just be canceled, I'd be executed. Yeah, I'm happy to let Piers have the last word on Barbie. Have at it. Well, that's it for the show. Thank you to Radio America, as always, for having me as part of their great podcast lineup. And while I have you, I'd love it if you drop by HollywoodInToto.com. It's updated 7 days a week, and it gives you the scoop on what's woke and what's worth your hard-earned dollars. See you next time.